Subscribe to our YouTube channel and press the bell icon to get the latest updates. Hello everybody, welcome to Daily News Simplified, an answer to what, why and how of newspaper reading. Today we shall be analyzing the Hindu newspaper dated 12th of August 2021 of the New Delhi edition. The topics to be discussed today have been presented on the screen. Timestamping for the same has been provided in the description box below. Let us begin our today's discussion. Continuing with the weekly series of mains assignment question from the Daily News Simplified videos, the question for this particular week here is, India is at the cusp of the next generation of wireless technology 5G. In this context, enumerate the opportunities associated with the 5G technologies for India. The answer to this particular question has to be written in 150 words. Now, before writing the answer to this particular question, I would suggest you to go through the DNS dated 5th of May 2021 in order to understand various benefits associated with the 5G technology. Those of you who would be able to submit their answers by the end of Saturday, your answers would get evaluated by the faculties and teachers of RAU'S IAS. All the best. The first article in today's newspaper appears on page number 6 in the form of a lead article. The article is titled as A Healthy White Paper Beginning. This article shall be important from the perspective of GS Paper 3 Indian Economy, particularly under the subsection of Management of Public Finances. Recently, the government of Tamil Nadu has published a white paper highlighting its overall financial position. In this white paper, it has been highlighted that on an average, a family in Tamil Nadu pays approximately rupees 1 lakh in the form of taxes to both center as well as states. But in return, an average family gets rupees 1.6 lakh in the form of subsidies. These subsidies are given in the form of education, healthcare, transportation, water, electricity and so on. So because of the higher expenditure on the subsidies, the government of Tamil Nadu has accumulated huge amount of debt. It is against this particular backdrop, this white paper calls upon the government of Tamil Nadu to rationalize its expenditure on the subsidies and move towards the direct benefits transfer. See, even though this particular article is specific to the government of Tamil Nadu, but this article has national level relevance. This is so because even the central government relies on various subsidies for the poverty eradication. So a very important question arises as to whether the government expenditure on subsidies is making a meaningful impact on the lives of the people. Is it leading to poverty eradication? And as you can see, in previous year mains, repeatedly questions have been asked with respect to various aspects of subsidies. In mains 2015, there was a question as to why there is a need to replace the subsidies with the direct benefits transfer. In mains 2017, there was a question as to how subsidies affect the cropping pattern in the Indian agriculture. And in mains 2013, there was a question with respect to what are the different types of subsidies given to the farmers and what are the problems with respect to those agricultural subsidies. Hence, keeping in mind the requirement of the UPSC examination, let us first understand the background to this particular article. The budget making exercise or the public financial management has basically two components. Component number 1 is to raise the taxes, and once the taxes are raised, the money is then allocated among different sectors, different ministries and departments, depending upon the priorities of the government. So the objective of public financial management is basically twofold. 1, to increase the GDP growth rate, and 2, to eradicate the poverty. So one of the basic planks for eradicating the poverty in case of India has always been the provision of subsidies. The idea here is if you are able to provide for subsidies, we would be able to help the poor people to meet their basic needs. That is why the government provides various kinds of subsidies in the form of food, kerosene, LPG, electricity, subsidy on passenger fares, water subsidy, etc. In the year 2020-2021, the overall expenditure of the government on the subsidies was as high as around rupees 6.5 lakh crores. If you have not been able to understand as to how much of money is rupees 6.5 lakh crore, one should simply look at our expenditure on the defense. Our expenditure on the defense is approximately around rupees 4.8 lakh crores. So you can see here that our overall expenditure on the subsidies is much higher than our defense expenditure. So obviously we are spending huge amount of money on the subsidies. Question is not about how much money are we spending. Question is whether this money which is spent, is it leading to a meaningful impact on the lives of the people? Are subsidies the best weapon for the government to fight the poverty? Repeatedly, it has been highlighted that the subsidies are the politicians' delight. That is, the politicians keep on announcing the subsidies in order to enhance their vote banks as part of vote bank politics. But these subsidies, they become nightmare for the economist. That is, in the long run, they end up adversely affecting the Indian economy. So let us understand various problems and challenges with respect to subsidy regime in India. Now, based upon our discussion, you should be in a position to attend these 3 prelims questions for the practice. Apart from that, you should also be in a position to write an answer to these 2 mains questions for practice. The first question here is, the subsidy regime in India has not only proved counterproductive, but has also created market distortions leading to an adverse impact on the economy. Justify with examples. The second practice question is, the agricultural subsidies are encouraging those practices that needs to be discouraged. In this regard, discuss the need to increase the public investment in agriculture as opposed to subsidies. Now coming to various problems and challenges with the subsidies. The first and most important problem is with respect to subsidies being regressive in nature. See, some of the subsidies are considered to be the universal subsidies. Universal subsidies means these subsidies are given to all the households irrespective of their socio-economic status. So these universal subsidies are given not only to the poor households, but they are also given to the richer households. Take for instance the electricity subsidy, fertilizer subsidy and so on. So since these subsidies are universal in nature, they are considered to be regressive. Why regressive? They are considered to be regressive because it is the richer households who would get more benefit in comparison to the poor households. Now take for instance the subsidy which is provided on electricity. Now question is, who is it going to benefit? This is going to benefit only those households that have access to electricity. This will not benefit those households that do not have access to electricity. And it is usually the households that belong to the below poverty line households that do not have access to electricity. Secondly, even though the poor households may be able to get the benefit of the electricity subsidy, the richer households would get more benefit simply because the richer households consume more amount of electricity in comparison to the poor households. The second problem with respect to subsidy regime is with respect to leakages and corruption. See, the administration of subsidy regime is fraught with a number of problems such as inclusion and exclusion errors, duplicate and ghost beneficiaries, presence of middlemen and intermediaries, poor administrative efficiency leading to leakages and corruption and so on. Now, for example, the Shanta Kumar Committee on FCI reforms has highlighted that almost around 46% of the food grains do not reach their intended beneficiaries when these food grains are distributed through the network of public distribution system. When we provide the subsidies to the poor people, the idea is to ensure that these subsidies benefit the poor people. But in case of India, rather than benefiting the poor people, these subsidies are ending up adversely affecting the interests of the poor people itself. This is so because these subsidies create a kind of distortions in the market. And these distortions go against the interest of the poor people. So let us understand as to how the subsidy regime has created distortions in various sectors of Indian economy, starting with the agriculture sector. So in case of agriculture, the government can provide support to the farmers either in the form of subsidies or in the form of public investment. Subsidies is the government support which is provided in the form of minimum support price MSP, fertilizer subsidies, power subsidies, water subsidy. Even the loan waivers can also be considered as kind of subsidies. On the other hand, the public investment by the government is a kind of investment which is considered to be inclusive, that is benefiting all the farmers. Public investment also ensures that the farmers are able to promote environmentally sustainable practices, and more importantly, it addresses the structural problems of the Indian agriculture. So it addresses the long-term structural problems and hence ensures that the farmers' income levels double. Now take for instance the government's expenditure in the form of irrigation, improving the marketing infrastructure, higher expenditure on research and development to develop new variety of seeds, government support for the purpose of mechanization, etc. All of this can be considered as a public investment. Now presently, the government is spending approximately around 8.2% of the agricultural GDP in the form of subsidies. On the other hand, if you look at the overall gross capital formation in the Indian agriculture, that is the overall investment in the Indian agriculture, it is approximately 15% of the agricultural GDP. Out of this 15%, only 2% is contributed by the government and the remaining 13% it is contributed by the private sector and the farmers. So if you look at the overall expenditure of the government, where is the government spending more? Is it spending more on subsidies or is it spending more on public investment? The government is spending more on subsidies rather than on public investment. And as I said before, enhancing public investment is very important because it is inclusive, it is environmentally sustainable, and it solves a structural problem of the Indian agriculture. But rather than doing this, the government is spending more amount of money on the subsidies. And these subsidies are considered to be exclusionary, promote environmentally unsustainable practices, and more importantly, do not address the structural problems of the Indian agriculture. Now take for instance the MSP. Now MSP ends up benefiting only 6% of farmers in India. So the MSP regime does not benefit the small and marginal farmers. Similarly, the subsidies on fertilizer, power, etc. they promote environmentally unsustainable practices. Thirdly, even though the government is spending so much huge amount of money on the agriculture subsidies, the question is it solving the structural problems of the Indian agriculture? Is it leading to an improvement in the irrigation facilities? Is it leading to an improvement in the marketing infrastructure? Is it leading to development of new variety of seeds and so on? So this is in no way addressing the present structural problems of the Indian agriculture. Now take for instance the farm loan waiver. The government in the year 2016-17 spent approximately around rupees 3 lakh crore on the farm loan waivers. Now first and foremost, these farm loan waivers, they are considered to be exclusionary because they don't benefit the poor and marginal farmers who do not avail the institutional credit from the banks. That is the first problem. Second, these farm loan waivers do not address the structural problems. Now for example, it has been highlighted that whatever money we spent on farm loan waivers in the year 2016-17, that is rupees 3 lakh crore, if the same amount of money was spent on expanding the irrigation in India, the overall irrigation capacity could have increased by almost around 55%. So you can see here, even though the government is spending huge amount of money on the subsidies, rather than benefiting the poor farmers, it is going against their interest. The same can be said even about the minimum support price as well. See, every year the government keeps on increasing the minimum support price, particularly on the commodities such as rice and wheat, mainly due to the political populism. This in turn encourages the farmers to cultivate more of water intensive crops such as rice and wheat. So this in turn prevents agricultural diversification towards other crops such as pulses, oil seeds, fruits and vegetables, etc. So we have a very typical scenario in case of India, wherein there is overproduction of food grains, particularly the food grains such as rice and wheat. On the other hand, there is underproduction of certain agricultural commodities such as oil seeds, pulses, horticultural products and so on, because of which we end up importing pulses, we end up importing oil seeds and so on. So even today, India has not been able to attain self-sufficiency in some of the agricultural commodities such as pulses, oil seeds, etc. On the other hand, we have been continuously increasing our production of rice and wheat. So whenever there is overproduction of rice and wheat, obviously this translates into demand-supply mismatch, wherein the supply of these rice and wheat would be higher than its demand, leading to a drop in their prices. Similarly, we keep on facing inflation in commodities such as pulses, oil seeds, eggs, etc. The higher rate of inflation in turn starts affecting the poor people because they would have to shell out more amount of money from their pockets. So this MSP, on one hand, it is leading to lower price realization for the farmers, while on the other hand, it is affecting the poor people through inflation in commodities such as pulses, oil seeds, eggs, fruits and vegetables, and so on. So overall, the income levels of the farmers have got stagnated. Now this is particularly important because if you look at the overall production of the agricultural commodities in case of India, this has drastically increased since the Green Revolution. Ideally, this kind of production should have translated into higher income levels of the farmers. But unfortunately, this has not happened. This is mainly because of a kind of political populism in the announcement of MSP. So the MSP has got the farmers or the Indian agriculture into a kind of vicious cycle where the farmers keep on demanding for higher MSP in order to compensate for their lower income. But the higher MSP is not leading to increase in the income levels. Rather, the increase in MSP is leading to the decrease in the income levels. Let us now have a look at the impact of subsidies on the Indian railways. See, presently there is huge political populism in fixing the passenger fares. Successive governments have deliberately kept the passenger fares lower because of the vote bank politics. The lower passenger fares obviously lead to higher losses for the Indian railways. So to compensate for this particular losses due to the lower passenger fares, successive governments have increased the freight charges, that is the charges for the movement of goods. Now we call this as a cross subsidization. Now because of the cross subsidization, there is a modal shift in the transportation of goods from the railways to roads. Now looking at the geographical size of India, ideally to transport goods over longer distances, railways should be the ideal mode. But unfortunately, it is the roadways which has emerged as a preferred mode. As you can see in this particular table, the overall share of the railways in the transportation of goods has got reduced to 27%, and majority of the goods are being transported through roads. Now this particular modal shift in the transportation of goods from railways to roads has also adversely affected the overall competitiveness of India's manufacturing sector by increasing the logistic cost. So if you look at the overall financial position of the Indian railways, on one hand, the Indian railways is required to spend huge amount of money on payment of salaries and pensions of the government officials. While on the other hand, the overall revenue earned by the Indian railways is quite lower because of this cross subsidization. So if you look at the overall operating ratio of the Indian railways, this had increased to as much as 98.3 in the year 2018-19. This simply means that in order to earn a revenue of rupees 100, the Indian railways is required to spend almost around rupees 98. So the poor financial position of Indian railways in turn reduces its ability to provide for more capacity addition of new railway lines, and it also leads to poor service delivery. So as you can see, the overall subsidies on the passenger fares has adversely affected the financial position of Indian railways, which in turn has reduced its ability to undertake more amount of investment for capacity addition as well as to provide world-class facility to its passengers. Now coming to the impact of the subsidies on the power sector, just like how we have seen the concept of political populism in the Indian railways, we also see the political populism even in the power sector as well. See, in the power sector, we basically have two important components. One is the generation of electricity, and two, it is a distribution of electricity. The distribution of electricity, it is under the control of the DISCOMs, which are in turn controlled by the respective state governments. Most of the state governments have forced the DISCOMs to provide electricity to the households at lower tariffs. So these DISCOMs have been forced to provide subsidized electricity to the households. So obviously this leads to losses. In order to compensate for this particular loss, the DISCOMs have been forced to provide for the electricity to the industries at a higher tariffs. So once again, we see the cross subsidization even in the power sector as well. Such kind of cross subsidization adversely affects the manufacturing sector, and it also leads to lower profits for the DISCOMs. And as you can see in this particular graph here, the overall borrowings or the accumulated debt of all the DISCOMs has increased to almost around rupees 4.8 lakh crores in the year 2018-19. So the financial position of the discoms is poor. These discoms will not be able to invest money in upgrading their distribution infrastructure. This obviously would lead to a higher amount of aggregate technical and commercial losses. Technical losses takes place as the electricity is transmitted through the faulty distribution lines, and commercial losses takes place because of multiple factors such as the theft of electricity, non-installation of meters, poor efficiency in billing. So as you can see here, on an average, the aggregate technical and commercial losses of the discoms is as high as 22%. Now what this means is, for every 100 rupees worth electricity that is being distributed by the discoms are facing losses worth rupees 22. So for every 100 rupees worth electricity that is distributed by the discoms are able to get only rupees 78. And that is why their overall debt or the borrowings has consistently increased over a period of time. Now just imagine if the financial position of the discoms is poor, if the borrowings of the discoms keep on increasing, obviously this will lead to increase in the non-performing assets of the banking sector. So the financial position of discoms has an adverse impact on the banking sector as well. Apart from that, these discoms are not being able to make payments on time to the power generating companies. So this is adversely affecting the power generation as well. So on one hand, the poor financial position of discoms is leading to an adverse impact on the banking sector, while on the other hand, the poor financial position of discoms is also adversely affecting the electricity generation in India as well. And all of this is taking place because of providing the subsidized electricity to all the households. So coming back to our discussion here, the subsidy on electricity, minimum support price, subsidy on passenger fares, rather than benefiting the poor people, they are going against the interests of the poor people. And this is predominantly because of the distortions which they are creating in the Indian economy. Apart from that, the subsidy regime also adversely affects various sectors of Indian economy. We have already seen as to how it has affected the Indian agriculture, how it has affected the power sector, how it has affected the Indian railways. Similarly, if you look at the banking also, we have seen as to how the subsidies on the electricity lead to increase in the NPAs of the Indian banks. Apart from that, whenever the state governments announce for the farm loan waivers, such announcement of farm loan waivers adversely affect the credit culture in India. So this in turn leads to increase in the NPAs of the Indian banks. Further, from the perspective of public finance also, this has an adverse impact on the government's finances. As discussed before, the government is spending huge amount of money on subsidies. This is as high as rupees 6.8 lakh crore on an annual basis. This is obviously leading to a higher fiscal deficit. Apart from that, higher revenue expenditure on the subsidies is in turn reducing our expenditure on the creation of capital assets. So if the government is spending more amount of money on provision of subsidies, the government would have less amount of money on creation of capital assets such as roads, railways, ports, airports, etc. And this can adversely affect the overall productivity of the Indian economy. So looking at these problems and challenges with respect to subsidies, there is a need to go for the rationalization of subsidies. We need to ensure that the subsidies are not universal in nature. We need to ensure that the subsidies are basically targeted only towards the poor people. More importantly, the subsidies as such would have to be provided through the direct benefits transfer by leveraging the platform of the JAM Trinity solution. JAM here stands for Jandan, Aadhaar and Mobile. So by leveraging the JAM Trinity platform, we need to ensure the direct benefits transfer for all of these subsidies. Please do let us know in the comment section as to what are the pros and cons of the direct benefits transfer of the subsidies. That is, what are the benefits and challenges associated with the direct benefits transfer. Further, please do have a look at these 3 prelims questions for the practice and let us know the answer in the comment section given below. With this, let us now take up the next article. The next article appears on page number 7. The article is titled as An Urban Job Safety Net. This article shall be important from the perspective of GS Paper 2, Polity and Governance. See, the recent distress caused due to the COVID-19 pandemic has highlighted the need to have a urban wage employment program. So just like how we have a employment program in the rural areas in the form of MG Narega, we need to have a similar employment program even in the urban areas as well. This becomes quite important because right now most of the urban migrants are finding employment in the gig economy. And in this gig economy, these workers do not have job security, they are paid lower wages, and their conditions of work is also poor. It is behind this particular backdrop, there is a need to have a urban wage employment program. This particular article here talks about a scheme which has been launched by the government of Himachal Pradesh. The scheme name is Mukhyamantri Shahari Ajivika Guarantee Yojana. This particular scheme seeks to provide for 120 days of guaranteed wage employment in the urban areas. Accordingly, this article highlights a need to replicate the same scheme even at the national level as well. Accordingly, a mains question for your practice here could be, there is an urgent need for putting in place an employment guarantee program for the urban workforce in line with the MG Narega. Justify by giving arguments in support of this particular statement. See, in the DNS stated 5th of Jan 2021, I have discussed the need to have a urban wage employment program. In this particular DNS, I have basically focused on two important aspects. Firstly, I have discussed as to what should be the design of such a wage employment program. And secondly, I have also discussed about the rationale and benefits of such a program. So what I'm going to do here is I would be attaching the previous DNS video for the revision. Coming first to the design of the urban wage employment program. See, the MG Narega program has been quite effective because of its design. The design of MG Narega is strong, effective and inclusive. So the design for the urban wage employment program should be on the lines similar to MG Narega. First and foremost, just like how under MG Narega, we are provided for right to work to the people living in the rural areas, we need to provide for right to work for the people living in the urban areas, for which the parliament has to enact a law which provides for a guaranteed employment in the urban areas. So first and foremost, we need to provide for a legal sanctity to the urban wage employment program. Secondly, see, as far as the urban areas are concerned, in the urban areas, we would normally come across two set of people who are looking out for work. One is the informal workers and the second category is the educated youths. Now the urban wage employment program should be in a position to cater to both the informal workers as well as the educated youths. As far as the informal workers are concerned, for these informal workers, we should be able to provide guaranteed work for minimum 100 days. And as far as the educated youths are concerned, for these educated youths, we have to focus more upon skill training and apprenticeship. See, as part of the apprenticeship, the educated youths can get engaged in various industries and get the necessary skill set through the on-job training. As far as the nature of work which can be carried out under this particular program, the finances under this particular program can be used for creation of urban infrastructure such as roads, bridges, etc. The finances can also be used for public services. So some of the educated youths, they can be hired as apprentices in various municipal services such as the municipal schools, municipal hospitals and so on. Now for example, let's say there is a fresh graduate who has recently passed out from the college. Now this fresh graduate can be hired on a contractual basis by the urban local body to teach in the municipal schools. Similarly, the doctors can be hired also as apprentices in district hospitals. See, on one way, we are able to provide the necessary skill set to the educated youths, and on the other hand, we are able to provide for a much better municipal services. The funds under this particular program can also be used for the restoration of urban commons, such as they can be used for maintenance of parks, water bodies and so on. So on one hand, it will be able to create employment opportunities, while on the other hand, it will be able to maintain the urban environment. Just like MG Narega, this particular program needs to be implemented by the urban local bodies. and urban local bodies in order to identify the projects to be executed as well as to prepare the annual work plans. These urban local bodies should consult the wards. So through the identification of the projects in a participatory manner in close association with the wards, the urban local bodies will be able to ensure the success of the urban wage employment program on a line similar to MG Narega. In order to strengthen the implementation of this particular program, just like how we are provided for the social audit under MG Narega, even for this particular program, we need to provide for the social audit. Further, we also need to provide for a mandatory grievance redressal mechanism. Now, coming to the rationale and benefits of the urban wage employment program. First and foremost, presently in case of India, we do not have a dedicated program to boost the wage employment in the urban areas. Earlier, the government of India used to implement the Swarna Jayanti Shahri Rozgar Yojana, which was launched in the year 1997. However, in the year 2013, this particular program was in turn replaced by the National Urban Livelihood Mission. The basic emphasis of the Urban Livelihood Mission is on self-employment and entrepreneurship rather than providing wage employment. Hence, a dedicated wage employment program will be able to provide the necessary employment to the people in the urban areas. Nextly, as you must be aware, presently the Indian economy is facing the economic slowdown. This economic slowdown is primarily on account of decline in the consumption expenditure. This is further accompanied by decline in the employment creation. According to Periodic Labour Force Survey Report 2017-18, the unemployment rate in case of India is at 45-year high of 6.1%. In particular, the unemployment among the educated youths is much higher at 20%. The urban unemployment is much higher than the rural unemployment. Thus, by having a separate dedicated program, not only we would be able to boost the demand, but we would also be able to solve the problem of unemployment in the urban areas. Nextly, see, if you look at the present state of urbanization in case of India, according to Census 2011, it is around 32%. According to a recent study carried out by the World Bank, the level of urbanization is set to increase to 42% by the end of 2030. However, the problem in case of the urban areas is that these urban areas are not in a position to provide the necessary infrastructure to the people. Hence, such a dedicated program would be able to plug the existing infrastructure deficiencies. Nextly, according to Economic Survey 2018-19, India is presently in a state of demographic transition. According to Economic Survey, the share of the working age population is set to increase from 50% in the year 2011 to 59% in 2041. Whereas, the share of senior citizens is set to increase from 8% in 2011 to 16% by the end of 2041. As the demography of India is undergoing change, we need to provide the necessary services in the urban areas. We need to provide for necessary education facilities, housing facilities, healthcare facilities, particularly for the senior citizens, and so on. So such a dedicated wage employment program would also be able to cater to a changing demography. Nextly, see, if you look at the urban local bodies, the urban local bodies do not have adequate amount of finances to undertake infrastructure creation. Moreover, the urban local bodies, they face huge shortage of manpower. This in turn is leading to poor municipal services. So by having a dedicated wage employment program, we would be able to address the financial and manpower constraints of the urban local bodies. Lastly, see, the Supreme Court of India has highlighted that Article 21 of the Indian Constitution, which provides for right to life, this article does not necessarily mean only bodily existence. This also means a quality of life which is enriching. This is possible by providing other rights such as right to education, right to health, right to work, and so on. One among these aspects is right to work, which is provided by the Urban Wage Employment Program. This, in a way, would lead to expansion of the constitutional rights guaranteed by the Indian Constitution. So these are some of the benefits of having a dedicated urban wage employment program. So this is what you have to know with respect to this particular article. With this, let us now take up the next article. The next article appears both on page number 1 as well as page number 10. Recently, Prime Minister Modi was addressing the annual session of Confederation of Indian Industries. In this particular session, he outlined the vision of Atmanirbhar or self-reliant Bharat. In particular, he highlighted that earlier there used to be a time where people in India used to prefer more of foreign goods. But that psychology is now slowly changing. Now people in India are preferring those goods which are typically made in India. So slowly Atmanirbhar Bharat is taking roots. However, taking it forward, there is a need to ensure the success of Atmanirbhar Bharat by creating a conducive ecosystem. Now, in order to create a conducive ecosystem, obviously a number of important parameters are important. But the most significant one among them is increasing our investment in research and development. Increasing the investment in research and development will give a push to the innovation ecosystem in India. It will boost the manufacturing competitiveness of the Indian economy. It will unleash creative destruction. And more importantly, it will help us build a brand image of India. But in order to ramp up our investment in research and development, there are basically two problems. First and foremost, the expenditure on research and development in case of India is hardly around 0.7% of India's GDP. This is much lower in comparison to other countries such as China, which spends 2.1% of its GDP on research and development. USA spends 2.8% of its GDP. South Korea as well as Israel spend almost around 4.6% of the GDP on research and development. So India is spending very less amount of money on research and development. The second problem is a major chunk of research and development expenditure is majorly undertaken by the public sector or the government. The share of the private sector in the research and development expenditure is quite lower. It is behind this particular backdrop, Prime Minister Modi has highlighted that a vehicle cannot run on a single wheel. That means the government alone cannot take the entire burden or the responsibility of ensuring the Atmanirbhar Bharat. Even the private sector has to come forward and ramp up its investment in research and development. That alone will help us ensure the success of Atmanirbhar Bharat. Accordingly, he has called upon the industry to increase its risk-taking appetite and step up its investment, especially in research and development. So as far as this particular article here is concerned, one should know various aspects of innovation in India. For example, why there is a need for innovation, what are the achievements of India with respect to innovation, what are the current problems with respect to innovation ecosystem, and how these problems can be addressed. Now, all of these aspects I have already discussed in the economic survey. In this year's economic survey, we had a separate chapter dedicated to innovation. And as part of the discussion of this particular chapter, I have discussed on all of these aspects related to innovation. So since this particular topic has already been discussed, I will not be discussing this topic once again. The link to this particular video has been provided in the description box below. Now, based upon our discussion in the economic survey, let us try to solve this particular prelims question for practice. The question here is, with reference to the expenditure on research and development in India, consider the following statements. The investment on research and development has increased both in terms of absolute value and percentage of GDP during the last decade. Now, this particular graph here shows as to how investment on research and development has changed in the last decade or so. As you can see, in terms of absolute value, the overall expenditure on research and development has consistently increased. But in terms of percentage of GDP, it has remained stagnant at 0.7%. That is why the first statement which is given here is wrong. The second statement says the private sector accounts for the higher share of research and development expenditure as compared to the public sector. Once again, as discussed in the economic survey discussion, this particular statement here is also wrong. Accordingly, the right answer to this particular question would be D. That is neither 1 nor 2. The next article appears on page number 13. The article is titled as Sudan to hand over Bashir or the genocide trial. This particular article highlights that Sudan is set to hand over its longtime autocrat Omar al-Bashir to the International Criminal Court for his alleged involvement in the Darfur conflict. This article shall be important mainly with respect to prelims under the subsection of international institutions. As part of this particular video analysis, let us have a brief understanding about the International Criminal Court. In the year 1998, around 120 countries across the world came together and adopted the Rome Statute in order to establish the International Criminal Court. This Rome Statute entered into force on the 1st of July 2002. It is for the first time in the history of mankind that the states have come together and they decided to set up an international court which can investigate and prosecute individuals who have been accused of committing the most heinous crimes. The International Criminal Court is situated at Hague in Netherlands, and if you look at the jurisdiction of this particular court, this court has the power to investigate, prosecute and try individuals who have been accused of committing the most serious crimes. But here, these serious crimes should have committed after the Rome Statute entered into force. That means the International Criminal Court can investigate only those crimes which have been committed after the 1st of July 2002. It cannot investigate those crimes which have been committed before the Rome Statute came into force. As to what kind of cases it can look into, these include basically 4 types of cases. These are genocide, that is to destroy ethnic, racial or religious groups, crimes against humanity such as mass murder, rapes, imprisonment, war crimes which can include use of child soldiers, killing or torture of civilians or prisoners of war, deliberate and direct attacks against hospitals and so on. And the last one is the crimes of aggression, which is basically the use of armed force by a particular state against the sovereignty, integrity or independence of another state. Please do understand here that the International Criminal Court can prosecute only the individuals who have been accused of these 4 heinous crimes. The International Criminal Court cannot prosecute either the groups nor the states. Now the question is, when can the International Criminal Court take up a case? Now it can take up a case under 3 different circumstances. For example, if a case has been committed by a citizen of a country which has signed and ratified the Rome Statute, if a case has been committed in a country which has ratified the Rome Statute, or thirdly, if a crime has been referred by the United Nations Security Council. As far as its relation with the United Nations is concerned, please do understand here that the International Criminal Court is an independent judicial organ. It is not an organ of the United Nations. United Nations has a separate court which is called as International Court of Justice. But at the same time, there is an agreement which has been signed between the International Criminal Court and the United Nations in order to foster the cooperation between ICC and United Nations. For example, as per the agreement which has been signed between these 2 entities, the United Nations Security Council can refer a particular case to be taken up by the International Criminal Court, even though such a case may not fall under its jurisdiction. Now, this has been done in certain cases such as Darfur in case of Sudan as well as Libya. Lastly, as far as differences between the International Criminal Court and the International Court of Justice is concerned, first and foremost, as highlighted before, the International Criminal Court is not a United Nations organ, rather it is an independent judicial body. On the other hand, the International Court of Justice, it is the official judicial organ of the United Nations. The second is with respect to jurisdiction. As highlighted before, the International Criminal Court can try various serious crimes such as genocide, crimes against humanity, war crimes, crimes of aggression and so on. As far as the International Court of Justice is concerned, it basically deals with the legal disputes that may arise between the states. For example, the International Court of Justice can look into the border disputes, maritime disputes which may arise between various United member countries. The third difference is with respect to jurisdiction. The International Criminal Court's jurisdiction is applicable only to those member countries which have signed and ratified the Rome Statute, whereas the jurisdiction of the International Court of Justice is applicable to all the countries which are considered to be the United Nations member states. And lastly, as far as India is concerned, India has not ratified the Rome Statute, and hence India is not a member state of the International Criminal Court. With this, let us now take up the next article. With this, we have come to the end of today's discussion. Now let us have a look at the question for the day. The answer to the question that was asked in yesterday's DNS is option D.